Okay, so first when we talk about climate change, we usually hear about all these greenhouse gases, about the effects of it, about the carbon cycles and such. But actually once we get into it, it becomes a bit bigger, and it also becomes an issue of pollution. It becomes an issue of biodiversity, about pesticides, about how we utilize resources and what we use them for, and how that influences our living environment. But even further than that, if we add to it health concerns and how all the ties come together from also economics and social perspectives of it, then we get the so-called perfect storm, which kind of encompasses climate change, resource depletion, diet-related ill health, as well as population growth. And this is really a massive problem that we are facing right now. And it's really hard to address each of these things individually because they have effects on other fields as well. So this is really what we're facing now, and we have to get well organized to kind of sail through it. At the heart of all these things, what it lies is the agriculture, because it's linked through food to all the essential components of it. So it's linked to the environment, it's linked to the society, it's linked to the economy, to the fairness, to the equity. And this is why I chose the focus to be on it. So today we're gonna take a little roadmap through all these topics. First, we're gonna look at what's been done so far in UK in this domain, and then we're gonna look behind those processes to look at discourses and what they have rendered to be critical or to be important to address, how they've gone about it, and what has been left hidden or left behind. Then we're going to focus on some overlooked solutions in the form of the content itself, so what practical things we could do, and also how we could go about it. And then we're going to look at the role of the theory and social sciences as well, to look for it. Personally, I was looking for positively deviant cases from the field, so that's what all the field trips that I made. And I was trying to fit them into this little theoretical frameworks to see how we could create a better picture for it. Okay, so first thing about discourses. Baki came up with a solution, problematization, and she says that when we create a problem, we also create a solution, and when we create a solution, we also inherently create a problem with it. So it's not about the objectivity of the problems themselves, but it's also about a politicization of processes, and it's not about intentional manipulations of it, but it's just what happens when we decide on a definition of a problem. So there are some underlying presuppositions in any problem that we construct that's going to have implications on how we approach it, what we're going to carry out in it. But there's also other ways that we could frame the same problem, and it would probably produce different effects in the field. When we look at these discourses, we have to go all the way down to sort of their origin and how they were disseminated, but also at the same time we can look at the options to question them, to disrupt them, and to potentially replace them, depending on what we want to achieve with it. So regarding actions up to date, UK government has a big vision for the food system, and they've mainly been concentrating on health in the environment. They put this up as their priorities. They have recognized the multifunctionality of agriculture, so agriculture is really a field that brings together all these topics as an unemployment and payments and multiple other things, including imports and international contacts. And then it was in 2008 they kind of put together a legally binding legislation that's that promises sort of this number of cutting back on the greenhouse gas emissions relative to the 1990 baseline. Even though this has been in place for a while now, the pace of transformation has been relatively slow, and the models that have been used have been mainly linear. So as you can see on the below example, this is one of the theories of plant behavior, which is one of the behavioral theories that's mostly in use. And then you have usually attitudes, values, norms, and a couple of other factors which you can shape in different ways. And then through this, you can influence intent and subsequently, supposedly, the behavior of individual consumer, as they are called. So this has been the predominant model that has been out there and has been utilized a lot. And alongside of this, there's been technical solutions, mostly focusing on increasing the yield, although the limit has already almost been reached in the most countries of the global north, so to speak. And there's been an attempt to minimize waste as well, but waste is again an issue which we can frame differently. So for example, we could also say it's not just about leftovers on your food, but it's also about wasting the feed on animals to grow them for human consumption. So this was mainly about behavioral change so far. And then in 2009, there's been a report about sustainability, particularly in the situation in UK, by Sustainable Development Commission. And they have really done kind of an extensive analysis of it, of the issues that we are facing and the UK is dealing with as well. And also they put together a couple of charts on proposed solutions, how we could go about it, what influences it would have, both positive and negatives in different domains. So it was quite comprehensive. And they started to outline some of the recommendations to the government. But then there was a shift in political landscape in 2010, and a lot of these things have been reframed, and a lot of projects have been changed significantly, or left out altogether, and then other things have been put in place. So that has been one of the problems that it happens in the government. Okay, so underlying the principles and assumptions behind this behavioral change, and also the choices that we can make as consumers, is that we have a model that is based on growth and on profit making and on ever greater efficiency. And we are considered, due to the market, as consumers, as the people that who have the power. So we have been hearing a lot about voting with our forks and our wallets. But indeed, there's much that goes beyond it. So as we can see here, this is the bottleneck that occurs, and a lot of power is concentrated just in that little part there. So some 300 to 500 companies control 70% of the choices, and these choices have all been pre-edited by the time we see them in supermarkets. So we don't really have free choice as much as we would like to believe, perhaps. And also farmers, they don't really have as much power as well, because they're just trying to fit in, compete on the global markets, and they're often used to either go out of agriculture altogether or really exploit natural resources as well as animals and other human beings, just to be able to survive and keep it going. So some of the overlooked solutions, as we talked about before, this is kind of a problematization of the current dietary regimes that you have here in UK. So you have, generally, you eat too much saturated fat, too much salt, and added sugar, which kind of coincides in a lot of non-communicable diseases. Next to this is a chart of what your land is being used for. So grassland, rough grazing, other land, and crops. And 50% of cereal crops from UK goes to animal feed directly. And then the amount of land available for agriculture is also shrinking. This is one of the charts that kind of put together the impact that we have on natural resources, so on their use, exploitation, and how it can be renowned or not. And then the second one down there is the ecosystem quality, and the bottom one is human health. And they compared two growing systems, so conventional and organic farming, with 3 different regimes of diets. So on the left you have the omnivorous diet. So the first one is what people normally would eat. The second 2 paragraphs are about omnivorous, and then you have conventional, organic, and then you have vegetarian, conventional, organic, and then you have vegan, conventional, and organic. And you can see that the impacts of the vegan organic diet are really the smallest on all three categories, which is well, it's not so much surprising if you look beyond it, but as it has been an overlooked solution for so long, it has been interesting to look why this might be so, and why we are told to eat, for example, more vegetables, but not to lesser our consumption of other things. So when we talk about veganism, we're talking about a lifestyle for the most part, and we're talking about the inherent value of all sentient beings, and this has been kind of a restricted dialogue and discourses in the public domain just because it's so deviant in a way from it, and it's really being framed by the mainstream discourses as well. So if we presume that there's kind of like a consensus in society, then it becomes really hard to scope it into this field and take it forward. But veganism pledges for non-exploitative relations, which I think pretty much everybody can align with. And the entrenchment of our exploitation of the animals in the society is really profound. And there's been a couple of theories and a couple of views that have looked into it, why that might be and what the premises behind this are. And the speciesism is one of those. And it just basically means that we are making distinctions on the basis of species membership rather than on what particular abilities or qualities a person has, be it human or non-human. And that we are saying just because somebody is a member of our species, for example, doesn't matter that there might be bigger differences between individuals in different species than among the individuals within other species. Tightly linked to that is the concept of anthropocentrism, which kind of places humans above everybody else, and then according to that it kind of allows us to have more rights and privileges that we can cast over the others. And linked to that is also a concept of carnism that Melanie Joyce describes, and this is about being conditioned to eat certain animals but not the others. And she also talks about the 3 N's, and she talks about that eating meat is considered to be normal, natural, and necessary, which also kind of frames a discourse in the wider society. And while we're talking about carnism, then it really sheds light into this discourse, and then we can problematize it because it doesn't really occur that it's such a natural, neutral position, but it is constructed as far as veganism is constructed, an ideological construction. Okay, so as I said, it's considered a lifestyle, but mainly the focus is on diets, as we can observe it from the media, because this is just such a daily task that we do, and it's just really a thing that a lot of people gather around. Suitability of plant-based diets has been established and widely acknowledged among the top scientific and nutritionistic institutions for all individuals, basically in all the areas of life, all levels of activities, and all stages. So it is really surprising that it hasn't been spoken about more, also because it has additional benefits compared to the regular diet, and even though we can not get maybe all the nutrients from the food itself, for example B12, we can always supplement it, which is way easier than, for example, dealing with coronary heart disease or diabetes. So yeah, it has ups and downs, but so the other things which we have to take into account. Okay, so about successful organic growing. The definition is that it is growing of food, so vegetables and fruits, without the use of any animal manures or other inputs. And this is important because if we want to really extend the issue of veganism to practices as far as practical and possible, we can try to live that philosophy also in a practical domain, just take it to the everyday practices and kind of like round the circle. So Vegan Organic Network has been working on these issues intensively for a long time, but officially since 1996. And while they have been working on it, they also kind of managed to negotiate with Soil Association to incorporate stock-free organic growing into their standards. So you can now get actually certified as a farmer if you produce according to these regulations. One of the most prominent members of the Vegan Organic Network, as well as the first to be certified, is Stolhurst. And he's been growing a large number of different varieties and species of plants. And he has been really a pioneer in organic farming as well. So a lot of people still look up to him. And there's a number of Manchester projects that also have occurred, in part because Manchester has been kind of like a neglected industrial area that needed really some structural readjustments and inputs. So they really started to get things going there. So that's what I visited in the course of my research as well. Okay, so they're all social sciences for the great part by now. It has been to act as an end fix. So, for example, they would invent a technical solution, and then they would say, well, please find a market for it, or it has an unfortunate side effect, but how do we get people to accept it? But in a wider scope, social sciences could really be of a greater aid to natural sciences, not just because of the discourse analysis, but also of the ways that research can be carried out. And there is a vast plethora of research in social sciences that goes beyond behavioral change and the linear models, but they're usually not drawn up so much because of their greater complexity, and kind of it's not such a neat model if you want to put something in a black box and say, well, if you combine this and that, this is what you'll get out. But this is just, yeah, it just becomes a more organic thing when you look at it in a greater complexity in its whole totality. So the unit of analysis can also be beyond individual. It can also be a wider societal processes. It can be communities. It can be practices in particular, and it can show some insights into the evolution of things that are not isolated from everything around them. And then the model form that we're going to use here particularly, they're going to be transitions theory and also practice theory. Okay, this is going to take some explaining. So this is the transitions theory, and the general idea is you have a niche that may occur because people are interested in innovating, because they have a particular goal in mind, or just because they think it's nice to play around with it. It may also occur because there's some scandal or some pressure on the system overall. So for example, climate change or E. coli outbreak, they might create such niches. And then within those niches, these new innovations, they can kind of develop further, they can become stronger, they can diversify. And then when they recombine the elements which they're made of, they can eventually find their way into the mainstream. So these new configurations, then they might break through. The landscape is up there, and it's really complex. It's beyond any one particular individual's control. So it's really important that we take this into account when you're talking about behavioral change and about changes in society. But next to that, we have another theory that says, well, practices actually cut through all these different layers in society. So they don't just go from niches to mainstream, but they also go from one domain to the others. For example, our eating is connected to growing of food, and it's connected to marketing of food, and to a couple of other areas of like working, for example, or sleeping, or just hanging out with friends, that cut through all these different levels. So this has also been an idea to kind of like situate it in society and show how daily practices of people, their routine behaviors, kind of fit into this, because this is really more about the novelties and about the unusual events that kind of make a breakthrough. Okay, so we have a practice theory then, and it is really simple actually when you think about it, because it just assumes that every person is a carrier, and we get recruited to certain practices that we kind of carry through for a while, and then we might stick with it or not. It depends on us and how we go along. But by doing so, we have to draw on different elements, and the three elements that practices are made of are materials, competences, and meanings. And this can exist individual of us, but we are required to link them together to carry them out and replicate them. So we can connect them all together. So for example, we have a field, a vegetable field, and we have some growing skills, and we have some marketing skills. And also we can assign meaning to it. We can say, well, we're gonna grow food now because we want to be more independent, or we want to earn some extra money, or we want to be more in nature, we want to get more therapeutical effects out of it, things like that. But also these practices can also disintegrate. If, for example, something happens, like the land is not available anymore, we have to leave it, or maybe we get hurt and we're not able to work the land anymore. The thing is also, when we're carrying out these practices, all these three elements, they kind of change related to each other. So for example, we might go into growing because we just think it's nice to have a use for our front patch of land, but we also, when we know more about it or we get more into it, we might learn additional skills in the meaning changes for us. So for example, it can become our free time activity, or we can become really involved into sustainability, and then it may reach us, link us to other practices as well. It may spill out in other domains. This is about the meaning of the practices and also other elements of it and how they change over time. So building on what we've previously discussed, we can have certain materials, competences, and meanings in place, as we might in farming, for example. But there's different forms of farming, different forms of agriculture, and if we look really back in time, we can see that it has changed significantly, and not in all the parts of the world in the same way or to the same extent. So although when we think about farming, we think about one particular practice, but indeed it's really varied. So if you could say that at the time when we were conventional farmers and we had certain materials, for example, we had the land, we had some tools for it, we had some seeds, we had some fertilizers, for example, synthetic ones, and we had some pest control measures that we would employ. We also could have the market that was a supermarket or another means. And it could be, for example, just the meaning of it could be income generation. And then in time, we might shift the meaning to, well, we want to earn a premium because we want to sell organic food, for example. So then you have to change the materials to some extent. You can still use the land, although it has to transition according to regulations. You can still use pretty much the same equipment. But also you have to incorporate some new materials. You might use new seeds, you may use new fertilizers, new ways to do that. And also your competences might have to change accordingly, because it is not the same to just go buy a bag of synthetic fertilizers and sip it around the field, or just having to make your own compost and then make it ripe and then distribute it around the field. So this is how the meaning and the practices might change in time. And there's also similarities and differences between different arrangements. Earlier I mentioned stock-free, and stock-free has a lot in common with organic agriculture, but also in a way with stockless agriculture. And although they draw on different elements depending on the particular arrangement, the organic also draws in a large part by building fertility that is based on plants, so crop rotations, and then green manures, also different ways of intercropping and tillage. And they try to use natural pest control measures as far as possible, things like that. So that can really easily seep through it. And also the markets might be very similar, because it's just a product that's made more for the taste of it, and you use different varieties than for the mainstream supermarket. So it's kind of a specialty produce that might not be suitable for supermarkets because of their standards, but also because of the inherent qualities of the things that we produce. This is kind of how practices in real life can also share elements, and this is how they kind of get connected through other domains and bring together more circles. For example, if we have food in the middle, it's going to encompass the practices of eating, but it's also going to encompass, for example, the practice of growing. So this is inherently, you have this 1 degree of separation, sort of an idea going on. And whereas it can have very different meanings, but it can also combine those two, bring them closer together. For example, if you're talking about vegan diets, we can talk about the meaning. When we are eating it, we can have the meaning of trying to do something good for our health. We can try to do something good for the environment, or we can start with the animals, or about human rights and things like that. But also this kind of overlaps with the other meanings that growing of food has inherently. So we're facing a vast myriad of challenges these days, and we really have to come up with some integrated solutions that are going to address all of them as much as possible with the minimum of negative effects. And preferably we would focus on areas that have disproportionately large effects, that cut cross practices, cross actions, cross domains, cross sectors, and can bring kind of like synergistic benefits to all of them, or most of them, to some extent. In this way, plant-centered diets and agricultural practices can really help address these issues. And we have to weigh the inconveniences of changing our current ways, and not just of thinking, but also of acting. So how we would, for example, routinely go about our days and our eating habits and other things, against the effects of status quo. So what would happen if we wouldn't do it? And even though beliefs, attitudes, values, and norms may shape our behaviors and practices, so do other infrastructures and bigger societal arrangements, systems of governance, and our daily routines. And inherently it comes down to practices living if they manage to recruit new carriers and sustain themselves like that. So it is not just about what you think about it, but also if you manage to get through with it repeatedly. So what's next when it comes to research and when it comes to our actions? Well, first, there's a need for greater reflection and really bringing up discourses of what has been done and how it could be done, for example, in different ways. What are the roles of science, but also of governments, of individual people, of citizens, and what their responsibilities are. And also, there's a very big need to kind of reevaluate our reliance on animal exploitation, which is currently deemed the cornerstone of progress, so to speak. It's seen something as something that we would want to strive to, the westernized lifestyles and diets. And then we need to be aware that there is a large empowerment that is available beyond the individual behavioral and linear models, and that we would perhaps be thought of as citizens rather than just consumers acting on our limited powers in the restricted market. We have to rethink the role and potential of technology. So what we can really do with it, with looking for a silver bullet that's going to save us all by the end of the day. And we have to think about the importance of context. So, for example, society, and how it all might play out in real life, whether the measures that would be generated by this technology would be widely applicable to a vast amount of countries and people, whether they would be able to afford it and whether they would be able to generate results that we want to achieve through it. The aim should then be for radical changes, and radical in the sense of really going to the root of it and addressing the causes of it, to maximize certain effects but minimize others. And then we should further explore how practices could be proliferated in a way to benefit all these domains. And perhaps we should be looking more into dependence of social ties. So what does it mean to be hanging out in certain circles, and which areas really allow for a greater transmission of ideas and practices? Is it a social network that would be consisting of our relatives? Is it more about our friends? Is it more about our working environment? Is it more about our upbringing? Is it more about our locality, online forums, things like that? And see where there's strong and weak ties between them, so we could really jump from one person to the other and kind of try to spark this ideas and make them kind of more contagious, more attractive. Try with those circles first and then go from there. And this is where network analysis would play a great role alongside of practice theory. Thank you.
Would you like to also show the pictures of the
yes,
projects?
I can put them up.
There's a few rather nice pictures of the various projects that you can then have field work at while you take all that in. And perhaps we can, if everyone, particularly David, if you have questions that you'd like to
yes, please, questions.
put to Nika and anyone else, of course. So, do you want to talk us through this then, Nika?
These are just mainly the Manchester projects. Oh, this is an interesting presentation. Okay, so these are just the plots that people have, and this project focuses on immigrants and people that are kind of marginalized in society, and they come together here usually once a week, and they grow food together, and also they have meals together sometimes, which only consists of vegan ingredients.
Is that the Growing Together project?
Yes, that's the one.
Mm-hmm.
So this is your tunnel.
Yeah, they had a grant.
Yeah,
for
cool.
that.
It was really rainy the day, so the pictures are not that attractive, but it was really nice there. So it was just like an interesting establishment. Lots of people, just very different personalities, very different people coming together. And although they really had different motivations and aspirations, they were able to get around food growing. And even though most of them were not vegans or didn't see themselves as such, and even made some funny remarks sometimes, they still carried out with the practice. They understood what the point of it was, and they were happy to be in there. So this is the Devdale Eco Center on the other way of the park. So it's next to the reservoir, and they also have another of growing establishments there. It is bigger than Growing Together project, and they had horticultural therapy as well. So you can get like planting on prescription, but also you can get self-referred to it if you want to. So these are all the people that might be benefiting from either community that is there, or just growing practices themselves, or maybe they're just interested in it. And then the point of it was to kind of recruit also volunteers that could then help carry out these projects in the future. Some of their offices. They're also putting together some different growing materials, some literature, some other educational resources, and also from some other domains that might be in interest to growers. Usually they try to be very inclusive, so they really try to get some raised up plots. So also they allow for the disabilities, people with disabilities to attend and get active. This is a structure for children, so they could play hide and seek when it all gets grow. So they have been very innovative in their arrangements. They also participate in exchanges of seeds with other groups and individuals, and then you really can pick it out of a catalog, and then you can get some seeds from them, but also you can contribute seeds to the library. This is another establishment again, and they're really growing a lot of plants from scratch, but also they buy some in and then they raise them further for sales. But there's also a community garden adjacent to it, and also a children's playground. They also have a composting toilet, and they're also using the special compost for starter plants that is considered stock free. And they are looking to extend right now. So there was a parking lot adjacent that they managed to secure now, and they are just in the process of cleaning it out and laying some more plants on the table to see how to take it on. They have several spots also where people can sit down and chat. But also they have, this is a toilet. Oh, sorry, I didn't turn them around. So you can purchase some food and beverages there on the site, and they tend to go for vegan options because they think that they're most inclusive, so everybody can have them. And this is the roof garden.
So is that a housing estate behind? Is it?
Yeah, there is. There was supposed to be a lunar Earth moon circle. How do you call it? I forgot about it.
Sorry?
They had a building around it.
Oh, the structure that the students have built.
Yeah, it was students, but also it was apartments, and there had to be like a helicopter decks on top at some time in the past. Doesn't matter. They told me about it. I forgot how they were called exactly. So this is for the Bugs. The Bugs Hotel. And the playground. So in all the years that they have existed, it has become kind of like a meeting point for the community as well, so they can do some activities together. And some students of architecture, they helped to build some structures on the site. So they designed them and then put them to practice. So this is the compost. The person that I talked to, she said that they had quite some problems to locate the compost first, but also to kind of use it because it has different properties than the regular composts. So it took some experimenting and figuring out which plants are compatible with it and how that could be facilitated further. These are some of the plans for the site, some ideas that what they might implement. So a water collecting structure, how to pedal power it. This is next door, where they provide some food. And this is Jenny's farm. So it's really large fields, and you can see some green manures, but you can see also some produce still in the fields. And starter plants. They also do quite a bit of horticultural therapy, and they're growing lots of leafy greens for salads. And they're starting to grow more trees as well.
So David Graham is very kindly here representing all of these growing groups. Jenny Griggs Hall. I never remember sure. Yeah, whose farm we just saw that Yasmin and I visited last year, and the home community garden. David can tell you more. So, David, would you like to take the opportunity to say a few words?
Yeah, okay. I think that what Nika has represented is something that we've been struggling with since 1996, when we first formed the Vegan Organic Network, which is how we put all those disparate parts together, how we begin to make some sort of impact, which is all demonstrated in the illustrations, how we begin to change the culture,
Yeah.
and how we begin to work together collectively with all the vegan organisations, which Amanda is certainly helping us in that respect, but there are other organisations which are vegan, which are sympathetic, which again you illustrate there, the different strands of the movement. The core of the Vegan Organic Network is quite clearly ethical, vegan, but also very political.
Mm-hmm.
And our struggle has always been, where we live in Chawson, how we connect the moral and the ethics of veganism, which we don't ostensibly promote. We promote stock-free organic farming, so that it impinges on the Green Party, the so-called Labour group that's been in power for donkey's years in Manchester, and how the people of Manchester begin to appreciate the 6 farming and growing groups that are immediately around Manchester, in which you've shown photographs of some of them,
Mm-hmm.
and how they're all run by women, by the way. I think you should know that.
Yeah.
We had our first meeting with them last week to do something which we then also discussed with Nika and with Amanda. What we discussed with them was, if you like, a low-level networking newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we really want to do, and we've discussed this with you, is a high-level, academic, scientifically based paper that begins to speak. We've got to raise our profile, right, to make it really meaningful. We've got to get the people who may not be eminently sympathetic to what we're doing. So how do we raise our profiles? So we want to have a journal which is scientific, which is intellectual, certainly also speaking to farmers and growers, but which finds a platform in the European community, a platform in the Green Party, a platform wherever we can get it,
Mm-hmm.
to begin to impinge and change the culture of what we all believe in here. We've done one of our first leaflets here, which links animal rights to human rights, and we're very pleased to get some of the feedback here. So the question is, how do we get out of our own comfort zone, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and how do we build on the very small beginnings which we made with the John Berry's farm in Sussex, where we are now, for the 2nd year running, buying his vegan organically grown grain, having it milled in Sussex, distributing truly vegan flour, and we're very proud of this. You know, it's really taken an enormous effort. We're primarily a voluntary group. In 5 shops in London. We've now got more to distribute in Manchester to Unicorn and the various other shops. So these are very small beginnings. So my question really is to Nika and everyone here, how do we pull it together? Can we have a magazine? How do we staff it? Who are going to be the contributors that brings it up to the intellectual and academic level that Nika has so ably sort of demonstrated by her presentation? So it's a question back to you. Or may I just say that we had a meeting with Ian Tolhurst, who's been farming vegan organically for probably 20 years, so it's sustainable. There's no longer the question that used to hang over growing vegan organically. And I will send round the paper to Amanda and Tanika, and it's available to everybody. And I've got a copy here of completely reforming how our Tolhurst Organic Products operate. We're going to form a CIC, a community interest company. We're going to have directors and people like that, really to raise its profile, give it sort of more status and standing in the orthodox community, because in a sense we're not the orthodox community. So we've had the meeting with Ian. We've got sufficient money to make it into a good conference centre, because it's ever so poor. The facilities there are really, I find them quite embarrassing. I mean, how we can have members of Parliament, the European community going round, and you see the toilets, they're very farming toilets, right? And so we're going by January, our aim is by next year, January 2015, we will have we need more money, by the way, but we'll have a good farm come conference centre, come research centre, come education centre. So, you know, that's the bit from me.
Okay. Yeah, I could respond on a number of points. First one, probably the skills, as you mentioned, the educational centres, that would be very welcome. I think it's really good that there's standards already established, because then you can reevaluate practices on the basis of them, and then even though they develop naturally over time, you still have a reference point and you can always update them. But it's also kind of a point of validation and acceptance from the soil association as well. So this is presents a good image for it. So then building on skills, yeah, it's really important not just to recruit new farmers from scratch, but also try to get more organic farmers and stock-free farmers that already have a certain amount of skills and that are to some extent already interested in one of the meanings of stock-free, for example. It is not just about animal rights per se necessarily, because a lot of people that are growing stock-free organically are not vegans and do not really identify with this ideology, but they still do it because they find another meaning to it, either in regard to environmental sustainability or just economical viability. I think a link could be made a stronger link with Transition Town and other groups that in part or in whole kind of overlap with stock-free, either in practice or in principle, because basically it is a very local establishment, and also how the food is then marketed, not just produced. It could really correspond to it. Was there another thing? Yeah, there was another thing about making maximum effects, and practice theory would kind of look into how the making of minimum amount of links, either between people or between the elements, could generate a bigger impact. And here you could, for example, focus on public procurement, or on kind of like how to get the same amount of food, not to multiple individual people, but for example to groups, and they could split it up further. Like Ian has a very nice model of it already, but also it requires quite a bit of coordination at this point. So these things take some time to get set in place, but once they're done, I know Jenny Hall Griggs, she was trying to get the more food to schools, and the thing is, it didn't quite work out that way as she had planned and hoped for. But the thing is, you only need to find a few people that are gonna go through with it, so it's worth trying in different parts, in different schools, with different people, trying to get comfortable with this idea of it, because once you succeed, you really have a place to deliver your food to. Does that answer in part?
Yeah. Just a word of caution though, that
Yeah.
when we use the word stock-free, I know we all know what we mean, but you have to bear in mind that probably about 95% or more of all our food is produced stock-free.
Yeah.
You have to use the word stock-free organic.
Yeah, yeah.
I know
Um,
it's a small thing, but if we were talking to farmers, they would say, "What are you talking about? You know, it's all synthetic fertilizers. There's only about 3 or 4% that is actually organic,
yes.
and of course with the vegan organic, something like that, I would guess. But nevertheless, in terms of feeding people, I mean, we feed thousands of people every week by vegan organic farming. So yes, thank you.